Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis, LA and dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello, could I please speak with Amanda Cincelli?
Yes, speaking.
Hello, Amanda. This is Paul Holdengräber calling you. I'm so pleased you could be part of the Quarantine Tapes. How are you today?
I am too. I'm great. Thank you for inviting me.
Well,
It's an honor.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Tell me how. First of all, could you introduce yourself and the work you do for Naval? I think for our listeners, it will be very interesting to know what you do usually, and then I'll ask you what you're doing at the present time.
Absolutely. So my name is Amanda Cincelli. I'm originally from Montreal, Quebec in Canada, and I'm an artist, and I like to call myself a strategic designer, community organizer, and cultural programmer. And a few years ago, I co-founded an organization that's based in Los Angeles. It's called Naval. And we are essentially a nonprofit cultural organization, but we're also a multi-purpose community space with a central location in downtown Los Angeles. And we host many public events. We have a community-led learning collaborative platform. We also have a residency program. And really what we do is bringing different people and creatives together and sort of provide opportunities to engage with one another and experiment with new ways of thinking, being, and organizing and making. So I'm currently the co-director of Naval with Michael Holt. So one of the co-founders and co-director of that organization.
Naval is a cultural space fostering collective action and kinship. I'd love you to unpack that. Particularly the word kinship interests me quite profoundly.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, that sentence is really something that anchors our work and everything that we do and how we approach all the programs that we create and support by the community. The reason why we say test site is really to connect with our approach, which is both organizational, but also through all of the programs. It's really an experimental approach, one that is like process oriented, one that, attempts to stay nimble. So this is really why we say test site, also site because it's a space, and it's multifunctional, multi-purpose. And kinship is really something, it's a word that we use and is really inspired by the work of the scholar Donna Haraway. And what we mean by that is really kind of a more holistic and ecological understanding of the world, of our relationships, of our interconnectedness between living and non-living beings. And so it's really kind of this mindful awareness that we're really interwoven in these relationships, and we really understand it as like a practice of care, of empathy, of understanding the other, what is not necessarily familiar, what is not like us, and really kind of try to think beyond that, and really kind of this understanding that we cannot really succeed without collaborating with each other and with our environment. So that's what we mean.
This is what you mean. The sense of kinship, though, is probably put to the test in some way, or maybe not. Maybe I should ask, is it put to the test in our time now? I'm particularly interested in it because, the word kinship comes from kin, and the word kin means being of kin, which produced then the word kindness. And so,
Right.
I'm interested in a moment when, in fact, and we'll get back to the work of Naval, in fact, when we're socially isolated, and maybe more than just socially isolated, how is this interwoven connection that your center believes in deeply put to the test at this moment?
Right. I mean, it's put to the test in so many different ways. And just even the fact that we are forced right now to connect through these platforms online and find ways to connect with one another in these new ways. I mean, they're not really new, but we have to find new ways, I suppose, to connect through them. It's absolutely put to the test. I mean, we have to really think deeply about how we are caring for one another, and how can we care for one another when one of the ways in which we are we have to care currently is by isolating ourselves. So it's a really interesting negotiation between how to be isolated and at the same time find ways to be caring, and how that is in itself an act of care in this moment.
Yeah, I always say that at this moment, we can't really touch each other, but we need to be in contact with each other, still have the feeling of others as proximate to us. Tell me, on a typical day before the quarantine, what happens at Naval?
Right, it changes a lot week to week. So we
give me your favorite week.
My favorite week is one where the residents of Naval are really utilizing the space to rehearse, to put some of their works in progress and experiment. And it's one where there's lots of meetings happening in the space, particularly through our assemblies program. So there's lots of people coming together to learn about a specific topic together or work on a project together. It's one where there's different members of the community who meet to share about their work and give each other feedback. It's one where we are hosting a public event that is on a topic that hopefully tries to stimulate our imagination beyond our current normative binary reality.
Give me an example.
Yes. Well, one of the, I'm trying to think what was the last event that we had. It feels like we haven't been on this space for a long while.
I know our sense of time has been also put to the test. It's hard to know what day of the week it is, and it's hard to think that the weekend makes any sense.
Absolutely. Yes, an example of an event that we had is we have a series of events called Collective Skill Shares, and it's an opportunity for our residents to teach us specific skills that they have to other members of the community. So we had Anis Hines host a sort of movement workshop where we were all sort of responding to each other's movements. So she sort of like guided us through this experiment with how we could move individually, but also together, and kind of like create this connection with each other through movement.
You mentioned residents. Do people live at Naval?
No, no one lives at Naval anymore. It's more that it's a group of people who have applied for an open call, and essentially they have access to the space. They have a key and access to our calendar, and whenever the space is not used for one of our other programs, they can use the space in any way they see fit. So anyway, it doesn't have to be they don't have to be working on a project. They could even be hosting a dinner at the space. So it's really meant for the space to be shared and to be utilized in whichever way that like really helps them benefit their practice, but also like bring people together in that space.
I was interested to read about, and you mentioned it a moment ago, what you call assemblies, and many of them caught my eye, but maybe one in particular, and maybe it's particularly poignant at this moment, these two words, queering death.
Wow, it's interesting that you bring up this one, because normally I don't, because I'm so busy coordinating the assemblies, I don't have time to participate in them myself. And this is one of the assemblies that I'm currently personally participating in.
I'm lucky.
Yeah.
So tell me about it, and tell me about why these two words together and what it might mean.
Right. I mean, the Assemblies program is a program where members of the community propose different topics that they want to pursue and that they want to dive deeper into with other people from the community that they don't necessarily know. So this assembly in particular is not something that, I created. It's something that, in that case, Ari Simonovsky proposed to the community. And it's really about thinking of how we approach death and how we approach grieving, and how we can think of ways that are different than the current the ways in the different rituals that we are normally engaging in, or that some of us might feel in some instances pressured to engage in. But like, how can we think of other ways that would be more pleasurable for us to approach, for example, the last moments of our lives? How can we plan for our death in a way that informs the way we live our lives? And how can we tackle grief in ways that are maybe not the ways in which we're accustomed to experience it? So it's about kind of stimulating our imagination together for alternative ways of experiencing these very challenging life moments. Whether it's our own death or it's the death of our loved ones. And also we often discuss in the group the death of non-human beings as well.
Challenging, particularly, one might say, at this moment, even more so.
Yes, of course, we discuss the current moment a lot, and a lot of members of the group have experienced the death of loved ones that are related to the pandemic, or have experienced the repercussions of not being able to be close to loved ones in their last days. So it's a really great space for us to be able to share that experience and to try to understand what that type of really unusual grieving looks like.
Where did this interest come from for you?
In the group?
Why, as I asked before, this combination of the word death and queering?
So the groups are not selected by me. They're selected by the community itself through a vote. But the reason why I joined it are very personal reasons that have nothing to do with the pandemic, because when that group was proposed and hosted at Naval at the beginning, we were not in this current reality. I personally joined because I had recently experienced the passing of a family member that was passed through assisted suicide, and it was a very mixed experience that I had that I was very unfamiliar with, and I wanted to participate in a space where we could discuss that and dive deeper into this way of leaving.
I understand this, but can you tell me why this word queering with the word death?
Right. Queering just meaning thinking of ways that are normative, that are not the norm, that are not falling between, that are falling outside of maybe death and living. That what is the other spaces that exist between. So that's why queering. But I didn't name the assembly.
No, I understand. I understand. Another project that really interests me is the Alexandria PDF Library. Can you give me a sense of, first of all, what it is? Having worked many, many years at the New York Public Library, I'm interested in what that might mean. And what is in that library?
Yeah, the Alexandria PDF Library is a project that was initiated by a former programming committee member, the artist Candice Williams. And it's a repository of different documents and artifacts, videos, photographs that are uploaded by members of the community when they come to the space. And it's activated by different gatherings that are organized by Candice. So basically, we will hold an event at the space where people come with different PDFs on thumb drives on their computer, and they can very easily upload the content to the drive, the server that's at the space. And they can also download any content that is presently on the drive, and they can also reorganize the archive in a way that they like. And eventually, the idea is that when the drive is full of content, that we would invite different artists, curators, librarians to sort of categorize the archive and in different ways according to a certain curatorial agenda. Or focus.
You mentioned earlier on Donna Haraway, a name I really haven't heard for such a long time, but I was happy to hear you speak or evoke her a little bit. You're an artist, as you said, and in your biography, it says that your artistic practice explores our contemporary cyborgian reality as both a site of transformation and control. How are you thinking about your cyborgian reality, whatever that may mean, in this new era when so much is mediated, in fact, by technology?
Right. I mean, this is an interesting moment to think about these things. I mean, my practice has shifted a lot since developing Naval, and I'm definitely, this moment is particularly interesting because my focus became a lot more about being together in space and sort of kind of resisting connecting virtually, sort of like getting back to a much more like embodied way of meeting and gathering and being and sharing space, physical space specifically. And so this moment is really challenging me on a personal level in my artistic practice, and also with the work that we do at Naval, to think about how we can connect meaningfully in those spaces, especially considering that, like you said, that those spaces are mediated by corporation. And I was actually just attending this an online talk yesterday that was very much reflecting on how we are, as these like critical thinking spaces, still engaging in these platforms that are extremely, that are surveilling us, that are extractive, that are like taking our data. So I think it's just going to be a matter of time to adapt and create our own alternative ways of connecting online that are not mediated by these companies, that are not, that are private, truly private. So it's definitely creating an interesting challenge.
Perfect follow-up to what I read, in fact, on your website. I have unfortunately not yet had the pleasure of coming to Naval, and hope that when times change a little bit, it will be possible. But in the meantime, I read the following passage, where you say art has the power to bring radical thought into meaningful forms and actions, which could lead to healthier and more just systems. However, critical and creative practices are vulnerable to instrumentalization, privatization, and subsumption into cultural capital. How can we maintain an autonomous position, particularly the last line, of course? How in this time when so much of our knowledge is in fact instrumentalized, how can we maintain an autonomous relationship to art and our practice?
Yeah, that's definitely the question that centers our work and that we ask ourselves through all of our programs, and it's a very complex question that requires an entire active practice of asking ourselves this question in many different ways and trying to imagine what are the other possibilities outside of what we know, which is basically a world that is entrenched in like binaries, hierarchies, and revolving around capital. So really Naval is about creating a space to practice ways that imagine like through fiction, and to try to practice ways of being together that try to resist that.
Help me imagine a world where consumption is not the primary goal.
Right. I mean, I feel like I experience those types of spaces all the time, actually, particularly at Naval and in other communities that I'm a part of, where what is really centered is the relationship, and it's not like a monetary exchange. I think that there is pockets of that everywhere, and that it's about really amplifying those moments, centering them, and I think it's definitely difficult to imagine, but it's that's the practice that we. That's the hope.
I want to push you though a little bit, because I know that earlier this year you took some time off to, as you said, rethink and reimagine the structure and process at Naval. What did this time, this hiatus, this sabbatical of sorts, afford you? What did you discover? This time you took off was before the pandemic, but in a way maybe it was the perfect time to think before this monumental event occurred around the world.
Yes, I mean, in many ways we are still in that moment. We just found ourselves spending lots of time producing events and not taking enough time to critically reflect on how to basically assess the organization that we were building and make sure that all of our organizational processes, structures, and we're really aligning with the type of space that we are all actively co-creating together. So we basically took some time to really build capacity as an organization, take time to pause and be less kind of in this production mode that events are a cycle. Like events are really easy to put us in that kind of production cycle.
I know that well. I know that well.
I'm sure.
I know that well. If it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. I mean, literally a certain way of going through culture, as if one was traveling through cities one had to do, as they say.
Absolutely. So we basically wanted to slow down and, in a way, kind of slow down our growth as well as an organization, and to make sure that we really centered care and that we were not growing in a way that like surpassed our ability to care as a community. So this is why we took that time, and this is what we're still doing now. And in fact, we're rewriting a lot of the language that you've read, that's that describes what is Naval and what our aspirations are as an organization and community. And we are basically trying to find ways that to exist beyond the space as well. And this is something that we were already thinking about deeply before the pandemic.
Can you give me a sense of one such rewrite?
Yes, absolutely. I would love to read it to you, actually.
Please do. Please do. If it's short, that would be wonderful.
Yes, I mean, in fact, some of it I already shared with you, but basically, Naval brings different people and creatives together to hold space and provide opportunities to engage and experiment with caring and collaborative ways of thinking, being, organizing, and making. Naval supports a range of cultural productions, creative projects, and practices that ignite our collective imaginaries and expand our capacity to cooperate in mutually beneficial, holistic, and emergent ways. And my favorite, Naval is a container for the multitudes, facilitating and striving for a braver, pleasurable, and generative space for mingling with, sharing, and the senses.
Why the word pleasurable?
That's one of the things that we always try to remember with everything that we do is how are we centering pleasure? And obviously I don't mean pleasure in a hedonistic sense, but how do we make sure that that pleasure is considered in all that we do? And we think it's one of the ways in which we can create something that's sustainable. And it's really thinking about it really comes from reading about pleasure activism as well, in the sense where with organizing people, there's a lot of admin work involved that can be very draining and taxing, but how do we always come back to centering the relationships and making sure that we enjoy what we're doing? And that has a lot to do also with the slowing down and shifting the focus from operating in a very productive manner all the time.
If you had to be utopian or perhaps hopeful about what this pandemic might bring forth for culture after the pandemic, it's solved in some way, if that makes any sense. What would that hope look like? What do you hope might change, or do you think things might change?
Many things. First of all, a greater understanding that we are interconnected, that our well-being depends on all of our well-being, our collective well-being. The fact that I hope that there's a greater awareness of what we can do, the power of our collectivity, and how we can try to slow down, alter the negative impacts our production is having on our home planet. So I hope that there's a greater awareness of that in our individual actions, in the potential that there is in how when we are able to mobilize and synchronize, a collective slowing down. So that is my hope, that we slow down, that there's a less focus on production and more on caring for ourselves, each other, and the planet.
Amanda Cincelli, it's been a real, I take it you of Italian descent.
Yes, my father.
Yeah, I imagine. So, Amanda, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And what I will remember most of all in terms of words you've used, which I think are so valuable and so important, is slowing down. And when all of this is over, I hope to be able to meet you and to come and experience Naval. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Me too. I would love to meet you as well and welcome you at Naval. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for yours. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.